Cop hits black nurse with baton, then realizes who he just attacked. Whack! The heavy wooden baton sliced through the air before crashing against the side of her face. A sickening crack echoed in the cold night as she crumpled to the ground, her hands clutching her cheek in shock and pain. Blood trickled down from where the baton had struck, staining the pristine white of her nurse's uniform. The cop stood over her, breath heavy, rage still burning in his eyes. "Stay down," he barked. Then, just as quickly as the fury had come, his expression twisted into something else. His eyes darted to the ID badge that had fallen from her pocket onto the pavement. His face drained of color. The name on the badge, the picture, the hospital logo. "Oh my God," he muttered, stepping back in horror. He had just attacked the last person in the world he ever should have laid a hand on. This wasn't just some random woman. This wasn't just another arrest gone wrong. This was personal. But let's back up a bit. To fully understand how we got here, to this shocking moment, you need to know what happened before the baton struck. You need to know who she was and who he was, because once you do, you'll see why this moment wasn't just violent. It was a tragic, irreversible mistake. It had been a long, exhausting shift for Danielle Carter, a 34-year-old nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. She had spent the last 12 hours on her feet, moving from one critical patient to the next, barely stopping to take a breath. That's what life in the ER was like. Constant chaos, never-ending emergencies, and the pressure of knowing that one mistake could mean life or death. But none of that mattered to her. She had chosen this life. She had fought for it, studied for years, sacrificed sleep, and even lost friends along the way. Because at the end of the day, she had one goal: to save lives. Tonight was supposed to be just another shift. But as she stepped out of the hospital doors at midnight, she had no idea that in just a few minutes, she'd be fighting for her own life. The streets were quiet, eerily empty. The city felt different at this hour. Darker, heavier, like something dangerous lurked just beyond the streetlights. Danielle walked briskly to her car, parked a few blocks away, her bag slung over her shoulder. She was exhausted, running on nothing but coffee and adrenaline. She barely noticed the police car parked down the street. But Officer Ryan Matthews noticed her. He was already on edge. There had been a break-in reported earlier, just a few blocks away. The suspect? A black male, mid-30s, wearing dark clothing. It wasn't much to go on, but Ryan had been patrolling for hours, scanning every face, every movement, waiting for something, anything, to confirm his suspicion. And then he saw her. A figure moving in the shadows, dark scrubs blending with the night. A bag slung over her shoulder. A fast pace, as if trying to get away from something. He didn't see a nurse. He saw a suspect. And he wasn't about to let this one get away. Danielle had just reached her car when she heard the voice behind her. "Hey, stop right there." She turned, startled, heart jumping in her chest. A cop, hand on his gun, eyes locked onto her. "What?" she asked, confused. "Put the bag down. Hands where I can see them." Her pulse pounded. She had seen enough news stories to know how these situations played out. She raised her hands slowly. "Officer, down on your knees. Now." Her stomach clenched. "I'm a nurse. I just got off work." She gestured toward the ID clipped to her scrubs, trying to keep her voice calm. But Ryan didn't see the ID. All he saw was a hand moving too fast. A potential threat. And in that split second, instinct took over. His baton was out before he even thought. The next thing Danielle knew, pain exploded through her skull, and she was on the ground, gasping, bleeding. And that was when it happened. That was when her ID badge slipped from her pocket and landed face up on the pavement. And that was when Officer Ryan Matthews looked down and realized who he had just attacked. His own brother's wife. For a moment, everything stood still. The baton was still clenched in Officer Ryan Matthews' hand, but his grip had gone slack. His heartbeat roared in his ears, drowning out the quiet city night. Danielle groaned on the ground, her fingers trembling as she touched the side of her face where he had struck her. Warm blood smeared across her fingertips. Her vision blurred, pain radiating through her skull. Ryan's eyes locked onto the ID badge lying in the dim glow of the street lamp. Danielle Carter, St. Mary's Hospital. His breath hitched. His stomach twisted violently. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't just another suspect. This was his own brother's wife. The realization slammed into him like a freight train. His mind scrambled for an explanation, for some way to make sense of what he had just done. How had he not recognized her? How had he let his paranoia, his fear, drive him to this? His knees nearly buckled. He had attacked the woman his brother James loved. The woman who had been there at their family dinners. The woman who had saved countless lives. And now, she lay before him, bleeding because of him. Danielle wasn't fully aware of what was happening, but she knew one thing. She had to get out of there. Her head spun. She felt sick, her vision doubling as she tried to push herself up. "Don't move," Ryan's voice wavered. "Danielle." Her head snapped up at the sound of her name. "He knows me?" Adrenaline surged through her veins. She ignored the throbbing pain in her skull and scrambled to her feet. "Get away from me," she gasped, stumbling backward. Ryan stepped forward, reaching out as if to help her, but she flinched violently. "Danielle, please. I didn't know it was you," he stammered. Her eyes flared with rage. Asterisk, so if I was someone else, it would have been okay. Asterisk, he had no answer. She panted, chest rising and falling rapidly. She needed to get to safety. She needed to call James. Her hand fumbled into her pocket, searching for her phone, but Ryan saw the movement and instinctively grabbed her wrist. "No, wait. You don't understand," he begged. But Danielle had spent years working in a hospital. She had treated gunshot wounds, restrained violent patients, and fought to survive in a world that didn't always treat black women with respect. And right now, she wasn't about to let this cop take control of her. With every ounce of strength she had left, she shoved him away. Ryan stumbled back, his foot catching on the curb, and he crashed onto the pavement. That was her chance. She ran. Danielle barely made it 3 blocks before she collapsed against a lamppost, gasping for breath. Her head pounded, her vision blurred, but she forced herself to pull out her phone and dial the only person who could fix this. Her husband, James, she gasped as soon as he picked up. "You need to come get me?" "Danielle? What's wrong? What happened?" His voice was laced with panic. She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. How could she even explain this? "It was a cop," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He hit me." Silence. Then, pure rage. "Where are you?" James' voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that came right before an explosion. She gave him the location. "I'm on my way," he said, and the line went dead. Back at the scene, Ryan sat on the pavement, staring at his shaking hands. His baton lay beside him, an ugly reminder of what he had just done. No, that wasn't even the worst part. He had betrayed his own family. James was going to kill him. Ryan knew he had 2 choices. 1, tell the truth. Admit what he did. Face the consequences. And hope, asterisk pray asterisk, that Danielle would find it in her heart to forgive him. 2, lie. Say she attacked him. Say she resisted arrest. Say anything to save himself. But before he could decide, red and blue lights flashed in the distance. Someone had already called it in. The situation was spiraling fast. And in a few short minutes, everything was about to get even worse. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the buildings, growing brighter by the second. Ryan Matthews' pulse pounded as he sat there, his mind racing. He could already hear the distant crackle of police radios, the unmistakable sound of approaching sirens. Time was up. He had mere seconds to decide what he was going to do. Tell the truth or lie. His hands trembled as he reached for his radio. His mouth opened. But before he could say a word, tires screeched. A black SUV whipped around the corner, speeding toward him like a missile. Ryan didn't even have to see the driver to know who it was. James. And he was coming fast. The SUV came to a hard stop just inches from Ryan's legs. The door slammed open, and James Carter, Danielle's husband, Ryan's older brother, stepped out. His face was pure fury. James was usually the calm one, the peacemaker. But right now, he looked like a man who had been pushed too far. Ryan barely had time to stand before James was on him. "What did you do to my wife?" James roared, shoving him back, so hard Ryan nearly lost his balance. Ryan's hands shot up, James, listen. Bam! James' fist connected with Ryan's jaw before he could even finish his sentence. Ryan stumbled, seeing stars. Another hit came fast. And another. By the time Ryan hit the ground, blood dripped from his lip. James stood over him, fists clenched, chest rising and falling like a bull ready to charge. Ryan coughed, wiping the blood from his mouth. His head was spinning, but he didn't fight back. Because, honestly, he deserved this. From the passenger seat of the SUV, Danielle watched the entire scene unfold through hazy, tear-filled eyes. Her face throbbed. The pain from the baton strike was unbearable, but it wasn't just the physical pain. It was the betrayal. She had trusted Ryan. She had sat across from him at family dinners. She had believed he was different from the kind of cops who saw black people as threats first and human beings second. But tonight had shattered all of that. She wanted to see James beat Ryan into the pavement. She wanted to see him suffer. But at the same time, she just wanted this nightmare to end. Her hands trembled as she reached for the car door. She stepped out. "James," she croaked, her voice weak but firm. James hesitated, chest still heaving. His fists twitched, like he was debating whether to throw another punch. But when he turned and saw Danielle's swollen, bleeding face, his rage exploded all over again. Before James could lunge again, the squad cars pulled up. Doors flew open. Officers spilled out, guns drawn. Hands where we can see them. Ryan, still on the ground, froze. Danielle stood still, her hands shaking at her sides. James turned, his face a mask of pure rage. And for the first time tonight, Ryan felt something he wasn't used to feeling as a cop. Because he knew how this looked. A black man standing over a bloodied white cop? Ryan knew exactly how this situation would be interpreted. The lead officer stepped forward, gun still drawn. "What's going on here?" Ryan had a chance to speak, to tell the truth, to say, "I attacked her. I messed up. Arrest me, asterisk." But then, he saw the way the other officers were looking at James. Like he was the problem. They didn't see a furious husband protecting his wife. They saw a dangerous black man standing over an injured cop. And Ryan knew that if he didn't say something, right now, James could get arrested. Or worse. The words came out before he even realized he was saying them. "It was a misunderstanding," Ryan blurted. Danielle's head snapped toward him. James' nostrils flared. The officer frowned. "What do you mean?" Ryan hesitated, throat dry. He had already started down this road. He had no choice but to finish the lie. "I thought she was a suspect. I acted too fast," he admitted. His voice was shaky, but he forced himself to look at the lead officer. "I messed up, but it wasn't an attack. It was—" His words died in his throat. Because when he looked at Danielle, her face was filled with pure, unfiltered disgust. Ryan had just thrown away his last chance at redemption, and he knew it. The officers lowered their guns. James was still glaring at Ryan like he wanted to tear him apart. Danielle shook her head in disappointment. The lead officer exhaled. "All right, let's get statements. And someone get a medic over here." Ryan's body felt numb. He had lied to protect James, but it didn't feel like a good deed. It felt like cowardice. He had taken the easy way out. And now, Danielle would never forgive him. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Danielle sat upright in bed, her face bandaged, her left eye still swollen. The bruising had deepened overnight, turning an ugly shade of purple. But it wasn't the pain in her body that hurt the most. It was the betrayal. She had spent the last few hours replaying the moment over and over. The baton striking her face. The look of horror on Ryan's face when he realized who she was. And worst of all, the lie. He could have told the truth. He could have admitted what he did. Instead, he had saved himself. A knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. She looked up as James walked in. Her husband had barely slept. His face was tight with anger, his jaw locked. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice heavy with emotion. Danielle swallowed. "As okay as I can be." James pulled up a chair beside her. His hands were still bruised from punching Ryan. "I talked to a lawyer," he said. "We can press charges. We can make sure he doesn't get away with this." Danielle exhaled. She had expected this. But she had also spent the last few hours questioning everything. Would pressing charges get her justice? Or would it just be another case of a black woman trying to speak out against police brutality, only to be dismissed or worse, blamed? She had seen it too many times before. And there was something else. Ryan had protected James. If Ryan had told the truth in front of those officers, James would have been arrested, maybe even shot. Ryan had lied to save him. That didn't erase what he had done, but it made things complicated. James, Danielle said finally, her voice quiet but firm. I need to talk to Ryan. James' face twisted in disbelief. Talk to him? What for? Danielle met his gaze. Because I need to look him in the eye and decide if I'm going to destroy his life, or let him live with the guilt. James exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. You're a better person than me. She gave a weak, bitter smile. I know. Later that night, Danielle and James arrived at the precinct. Ryan was already there, sitting in a small, dimly lit office. His uniform was gone. He wore plain clothes, his hands clasped in his lap, eyes downcast. When Danielle stepped inside, he couldn't even look at her. James stayed in the doorway, arms crossed, watching Ryan like a predator ready to strike. Danielle took a slow breath. Look at me, Ryan. He did. And when he did, she saw it. Raw, real, heavy. I should have told the truth, Ryan said, his voice hoarse. Danielle tilted her head. So, why didn't you? Ryan's throat bobbed. Because I knew what would happen to James if I did. They would have arrested him. Maybe worse. He swallowed hard. And because I was scared. I was scared of losing my job, my life, everything I built. Danielle stared at him, her eyes searching for something. Remorse, sincerity, regret. She found all three. But it wasn't enough. Do you even understand what you did? She asked. Ryan nodded. I do. And I don't expect forgiveness. He glanced at James. I don't expect anything. Danielle took a slow breath. Then, with all the strength she had left, she said the words she had been holding in. I'm not pressing charges. James' head snapped toward her. Danielle. She held up a hand. But, she continued, turning back to Ryan, you're going to turn in your badge. Today. Ryan's face paled. You don't deserve to be a cop, she said. You don't get to walk around with a gun and a badge after what you did. Ryan blinked rapidly, as if trying to hold back tears. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I'll resign. Danielle studied him for a long moment. Then, with a final look of disappointment, she turned and walked out of the room. James followed, his anger simmering beneath the surface. You should have let me ruin him, he muttered. Danielle sighed. I did. James frowned. What do you mean? Danielle stopped walking. She turned to her husband with tired eyes. He has to live with this for the rest of his life. 2 days later, Ryan Matthews officially resigned from the police force. His name never made the news. There was no big scandal, no justice served in the way people might have wanted. But for Danielle, justice wasn't about headlines. It was about knowing that the man who attacked her would never get to wear a badge again. It was about walking away with her dignity intact. And most of all, it was about knowing that she had the power to destroy Ryan's life and choosing not to. Not because he deserved mercy, but because she refused to let his mistake define her. This isn't just a story about police brutality. It's a story about power, about the power to forgive, the power to walk away, and the power to make sure that justice isn't just about punishment, but about making sure the same mistake never happens again. Would you have made the same choice Danielle did? Or would you have made Ryan pay? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you want more real stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Because trust me, this isn't the last story that needs to be told.